Before diving into this incredible story, consider subscribing to the channel and hitting the bell. Every story here has something to say, and you won't want to miss a single one. Washington, D.C., a city where history and modernity intersect, but where the scars of the past remain visible in everyday life. Marcus Jefferson, a high-ranking FBI official, black and respected throughout the country, prepares for a crucial day. His files are ready, his appointments carefully planned. He knows that his job requires rigor, discipline, and composure. That morning, Marcus leaves his apartment in a quiet neighborhood, his black sedan gliding silently through the still quiet streets. He thinks about the national security briefing ahead, aware of the importance of every decision he makes. Yet he is unaware that a few blocks away, Derek Thompson, an arrogant and racist young police officer, is watching him. For Thompson, Marcus is not a competent senior official, but a typical suspect. And in that brief moment, two worlds will collide, that of a man who embodies service, the law, and integrity, and that of a police officer blinded by his prejudices, ready to impose his biased vision of justice. What should have been an ordinary morning will turn into an unexpected, humiliating and revealing confrontation, an event that will shake not only Marcus, but the entire system he has served for years. Marcus Jefferson drove his black sedan calmly along the wide avenues of Washington, D.C. The morning sun reflected off the windshield and the skyscrapers as he mentally checked his schedule. Today he had a crucial meeting to attend on a national security matter. Every detail mattered, every delay could have consequences. A few blocks away, Derek Thompson, a young white police officer known for his impulsiveness and arrogance, was patrolling the neighborhood. He spotted Marcus and, for no good reason, felt immediate suspicion. This guy looks suspicious, black, well-dressed, probably one of those fraud or theft cases, he thought, already ready to intervene. Derek activated his emergency lights and ordered Marcus to stop. Marcus, surprised, immediately braked and kept his hands visible on the steering wheel. "Hello, officer," Marcus said calmly. "May I ask why you arrested me?" "Get out of the vehicle," Thompson replied curtly. "We'll check your papers." Marcus walked out slowly, showing his documents and FBI badge. "I'm Marcus Jefferson, an FBI agent." "Here's my badge," he said, brandishing it clearly. But Thompson, blinded by his prejudices, refused to recognize the validity of the badge. "Wait here," he said, "I'll check your information." He pulled out his phone to call his superiors, but took his time, insisting that Marcus accompany him to the station for verification. Marcus felt a tension rising within him. He was used to delicate situations, but the blatant injustice of this arrest struck him deeply. Meanwhile, passers-by began to stop, watching in amazement as a man in an FBI uniform was arrested by a simple neighborhood police officer. Their curious and concerned glances fell on Marcus, who remained calm, dignified, but silently angry. He knew this ordinary morning was about to change. What he didn't know yet was that this experience would be the starting point of a much bigger fight, exposing the deeply ingrained prejudices of the system he served. Marcus Jefferson followed Derek Thompson to his patrol car, his heart calm but his mind alert. Each footstep echoed on the still silent street, and passers-by continued to watch them in astonishment. Thompson, arrogant and self-assured, refused to acknowledge the FBI badge Marcus had presented. "I asked you to come with me for verification," Thompson said curtly. "No discussion." "Officer, I showed you my badge." "I'm a high-ranking FBI official," Marcus explained calmly but firmly. Thompson sneered, as if the words didn't matter. He wouldn't listen to reason. Marcus knew that getting angry would only make the situation worse. So he remained calm, but every second seemed to lengthen the humiliation. Arriving at the police station, Thompson ushered Marcus into a small interrogation room. The cold, white walls seemed to absorb the dignity of anyone who entered. Thompson began asking intrusive questions, some tinged with sarcasm and racial contempt. "So, you work for the FBI? You look different than I expected," he said with a condescending smile. Marcus kept his calm and replied politely, but with controlled coldness. "I'm here to fulfill my duties, officer. I have nothing to prove to someone who acts without reason." Marcus's every word was precise and measured, but the humiliation of being treated like a mere suspect despite his status and years of service weighed heavily on him. He mentally noted every detail, every word, every gesture of Thompson's. He knew all of it could be used to expose this injustice. Meanwhile, some passers-by who had been watching the incident moved closer, some whispering, others pulling out their phones to film the scene. Marcus felt the weight of the stares, but remained dignified. What he was experiencing wasn't just personal, it was a reflection of a much larger systemic problem. As Thompson continued his interrogation, Marcus sensed that outside intervention would soon become necessary. And he was right. An unexpected ally was preparing to change the course of this morning. Marcus Jefferson sat with his hands on the cold interrogation room table. Derek Thompson continued to question him, willfully ignoring the visible evidence of his identity. The young police officer seemed determined to prove Marcus was lying, blinded by his prejudices. As the minutes ticked by, Thompson's phone finally rang. On the other end was Sarah Collins, Marcus's FBI colleague and longtime friend. Sarah was known for her efficiency and decisiveness. She had been informed of the incident through the FBI's automatic emergency alert for its agents in critical situations. "Thompson," Sarah said in a cold but authoritative voice, "let Mr. Jefferson out of there immediately. You have no legal basis to detain him. He's a high-ranking FBI official." Thompson tried to speak, but Sarah cut him off with an unequivocal tone. "I repeat, release him. Any unauthorized detention of a federal agent will have serious legal consequences for you and your department." Thompson's face paled slightly. He began to realize he'd crossed the line. His hands trembled slightly as he tried to come up with a plausible excuse, but none came. Marcus, still calm, watched the scene, holding back a sigh. He knew the situation was finally turning in his favor. Sarah arrived at the station a few minutes later. She wasted no time in conversation and positioned herself between Marcus and Thompson. "Mr. Jefferson, you are free to leave immediately," she said firmly. "Thompson, you will write a full report and your superior will be informed of your actions." Marcus stood up slowly, regaining his dignity and natural authority. Bystanders who had followed the incident and filmed the scene watched silently. The image of an FBI officer unjustly arrested yet remaining calm and dignified was etched in their minds. As he left the station, Marcus knew this incident was just the beginning. The complaint he would file, Sarah's testimony, and the evidence gathered would expose not only the injustice he had just suffered, but also the deep-rooted prejudices within some police departments. That day, Marcus Jefferson emerged stronger and more determined. He knew his dignity was intact, and that the fight for justice had only just begun. Back in his black sedan, Marcus Jefferson took a deep breath. The midday sun lit up the streets of Washington, D.C., but for him, this was far from ordinary. He had just suffered a public humiliation, not for any violation of the law, but solely because of the color of his skin. Yet Marcus wasn't one to give up. He took out his phone and began taking detailed notes, the exact time of the arrest, the location, Derek Thompson's words, the officer's demeanor, and even the reactions of bystanders. Every detail mattered. He knew that for justice to be done, a solid case was needed. Upon arriving at his office, Marcus met with his immediate superior, Chief Special Agent Robert Hayes. He calmly explained the situation and provided all his notes. Hayes, shocked by the seriousness of the incident, confirmed that a formal investigation would be opened against Thompson. "Marcus," Hayes said, "what you went through is unacceptable. We will make sure everything is documented and justice is served. No one should go through this, least of all an FBI official." Marcus nodded, but his mind went further. He decided not to settle for a simple internal investigation. He was going to file a formal complaint for racial discrimination and abuse of power. He wanted this case to serve as an example and show that even those in power must be held accountable. In the days that followed, Marcus gathered all the evidence, surveillance video, bystander testimony, and Thompson's phone conversations with his superior. Each piece of evidence reinforced his story and exposed the officer's arrogance and prejudice. He knew this fight wouldn't be easy. Some would seek to downplay the case, protect the officer, or ignore the magnitude of the injustice. But Marcus was determined. Every word he wrote in his report, every piece of evidence gathered, strengthened his resolve to fight not only for himself, but for all those who might one day suffer a similar injustice. That day, Marcus understood one thing: his dignity was intact, but his role as a symbol of justice had just begun. And he was ready to go to any lengths to ensure the truth came out. A few days after the incident, Marcus Jefferson's case began to spread. A video taken by a bystander clearly showed Marcus, FBI badge in hand, remaining calm in the face of Derek Thompson's unfair accusations. Social media quickly picked up on the story. Hashtags and messages denouncing injustice and racism in the police multiplied at a dizzying speed. Marcus, though accustomed to pressure, was monitoring the situation closely. He decided to give an official interview to the FBI, choosing his words carefully. "What I experienced wasn't just personal," he explained to the camera. "It was a stark reminder that racism and prejudice still exist in our society, even against those who serve the law. We must remain vigilant and fight to ensure that everyone is treated with dignity and respect, regardless of their skin color." The interview went viral across the country. Traditional and digital media picked up the story, some openly denouncing the unjust arrest and calling for reforms in police practices. Marcus became, despite himself, a symbol of resilience and justice. Meanwhile, Derek Thompson was beginning to feel the pressure. His department's superiors were being informed, and the FBI's internal investigation was moving forward rapidly. His behavior, filmed and publicly discussed, could no longer be ignored. Marcus, for his part, did not allow himself to be carried away by anger or revenge. He knew that the fight had to remain strategic. He continued to document every development, prepare his files, and coordinate with his colleagues to ensure that the legal process would be flawless. On the streets, passers-by and colleagues showed their support. Marcus understood that this initial humiliation had sparked something bigger, a movement to denounce abuses, encourage justice, and remind everyone that even those in power must be held accountable for their actions. This chapter of his life, though painful, marked the beginning of a larger battle. Marcus Jefferson was no longer just a high-ranking FBI official, he had become a symbol of dignity and resistance in the face of injustice. A few days after the incident became public, the FBI officially opened an internal investigation. Marcus Jefferson worked closely with the department responsible for overseeing law enforcement. Every detail counted: Thompson's phone calls, surveillance camera footage, bystander testimony, and Marcus's own detailed report. Derek Thompson, now aware of the magnitude of the case, was under pressure. His local superiors summoned him several times to explain his actions. But faced with irrefutable evidence, he could only admit that he had crossed the line. Every day, the noose tightened around him, and his colleagues began to distance themselves, unwilling to be associated with his racist and abusive behavior. Marcus, for his part, remained calm and methodical. He knew that the humiliation he had suffered had to be transformed into a force for change. He attended every meeting, brought every necessary document, and answered every question with precision and dignity. He knew that his role was not only to defend his own reputation, but also to demonstrate that no official, regardless of his position, was above the law or the principles of justice. The FBI issued an official statement: any wrongful detention of a federal agent would be severely punished, and the incident would be used as a case study to strengthen training on civil rights and racial bias in law enforcement. Meanwhile, Thompson began to realize the gravity of his actions. His reputation was now tarnished, and he knew that serious disciplinary action would be taken. But for Marcus, this wasn't about personal revenge. His goal was to turn this ordeal into a lesson for the entire system: justice and respect for human dignity must prevail, regardless of individuals' positions or prejudices. This chapter in Marcus's life marked a strategic victory, but he knew that the fight for full recognition of injustice and reform of police practices was far from over. Within weeks of the incident, Marcus Jefferson's story had become a national phenomenon. Mainstream and social media outlets were not only talking about his unjust arrest, but also about how he had maintained his composure and dignity in the face of humiliation. Hashtags denouncing racism in the police and calling for reform were proliferating. Marcus was invited to participate in several television interviews. He chose his words carefully, knowing that each statement could have a considerable impact. "What happened to me could happen to anyone," he said firmly. "This isn't about me personally, it's about a systemic problem. We need to create an environment where respect and justice prevail, where skin color doesn't determine how an individual is treated." The footage of Derek Thompson, now under internal investigation, was released alongside the video showing Marcus as calm and professional. Public opinion began to polarize, with some defending Thompson and others bluntly denouncing racism and abuse of power. But support for Marcus quickly grew, bringing together citizens, civil rights groups, and even politicians. Meanwhile, Marcus continued to work on his cases, coordinating the internal investigation and the necessary actions. He knew that media pressure could hasten justice, but he remained cautious, ensuring that all actions were legal and beyond reproach. The national discussions surrounding his arrest sparked a broader debate about police practices, racial bias, and the need for structural reform. Marcus had now become a symbol of resistance and justice, his experience serving as an example to others across the country who had suffered similar injustices. This chapter of his life transformed Marcus Jefferson, from a simple FBI official to an iconic figure in the fight against racism and the defense of civil rights. And for Derek Thompson, the moment of reckoning was approaching, with consequences he could never have imagined. The internal investigation had moved quickly, and Derek Thompson was now summoned for a formal meeting with Marcus Jefferson and several FBI superiors. The conference room was sober, but the atmosphere was tense. Thompson entered, visibly nervous, while Marcus remained seated, calm and dignified, his hands resting on the table. "Mr. Thompson," Special Agent in Chief Hayes began, "we are here to review your actions regarding Mr. Jefferson's arrest," Hayes explained firmly. Thompson looked down, unable to meet Marcus's gaze. I thought that," he began, but Marcus interrupted him in a clear, measured voice. "I never doubted your ability to understand the law. But your prejudices took over. You abused your authority and humiliated a federal official in full office. This behavior is unacceptable." Thompson tried to justify himself, citing his instinct and doubt, but each word rang hollow in the face of the evidence, videos, witness statements, and official documents. Marcus, calmly and firmly, detailed each step of the incident, pointing out the police officer's arrogance and implicit racism. The superiors listened attentively, taking note of every point. Thompson, now aware that he could not reverse the situation, fell silent. The heavy silence highlighted the gravity of his actions. "You will be suspended and face severe disciplinary action," Hayes announced. "It is crucial that this type of behavior never happens again." Marcus, despite the humiliation he had suffered, chose to conclude the confrontation with dignity. "This is not a matter of personal revenge," he said calmly. "It is a lesson for all those in power. We must protect the rights of everyone and ensure that justice is administered without prejudice." Thompson nodded silently, shame evident on his face. Marcus knew this moment marked a turning point. He had transformed a personal humiliation into a symbolic victory for justice and integrity. Marcus Jefferson's story was no longer confined to Washington, D.C. The national media reported every detail: the wrongful arrest, Marcus's dignity in the face of humiliation, and the consequences for Derek Thompson. The entire country was now debating racism in policing and the importance of respecting civil rights. Human rights groups organized conferences and forums to analyze the incident. Marcus was invited to testify several times, not to complain, but to explain the need for systemic reforms. "What I experienced," he explained on a nationally televised show, "is not an isolated case. It reflects a deep and persistent problem. We must work together to ensure that justice is applied equally to all, regardless of skin color or status." Derek Thompson, meanwhile, faced severe disciplinary action, a prolonged suspension, mandatory racial bias training, and counseling. His reputation was now tarnished, and he understood that his actions had irreversible consequences. At the same time, the FBI used the case as a case study to train its agents to better recognize and combat bias. Local police forces also began to review their protocols, aware that the public was now watching every decision. Marcus Jefferson, though deeply affected by this experience, felt an inner satisfaction. The injustice he had suffered had not gone unnoticed. His patience, calm, and rigor had transformed a humiliation into a lever for change and education. Across the country, his name became synonymous with dignity and justice. What began as an ordinary morning transformed into a national symbol of the fight against abuse and discrimination. A few months after the incident, Marcus Jefferson returned to full duty at the FBI. Derek Thompson's suspension had been upheld, and the young officer was undergoing mandatory civil rights awareness and training. Justice had been served, but more importantly, an example had been set. No one, regardless of their position, was above the principles of dignity and respect. Marcus continued to testify publicly, participate in forums, and advise on police reform programs. His experience served as a model for education and training, and his name became a symbol of resilience and courage. The goal is never to punish, but to correct, Marcus explained at a national conference. Every incident like this is an opportunity to learn, improve, and ensure that justice is applied equally to all. On the streets of Washington and beyond, Marcus's story inspired citizens, police officers, and public servants to question their biases and act with integrity. Videos, articles, and testimonies continued to circulate, reminding everyone that racism and the abuse of power could be confronted and overcome through courage and determination. For Marcus, the ordeal had been painful but transformative. He had faced humiliation, racism, and injustice, but he emerged stronger, more respected, and more determined than ever to uphold the law fairly. And as the city continued its daily life, one thing was clear: dignity and justice had found a human face, and that face was Marcus Jefferson.